Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware, and today we're taking a look at this pre-built HP Pavilion. This is a gaming desktop, or at least that's how it's marketed, and it features a Ryzen 3 5300G, that's 4 cores and 8 threads on the newest Ryzen 5000 platform, but it's a G CPU, which means it's actually an APU, so there are onboard graphics, though we're not taking a look at those today because it also features an RX 5500, which is from what I can gather, a mostly OEM GPU, and it's very similar to an RX 5500 XT. This system has 8 gigabytes of dual channel memory. That's a 2x4 gigabyte kit. So on paper, it should actually game pretty well. And since I got this thing at under $600 from HP, it actually might not be a bad value here considering the current GPU market. So let's go ahead and take a look at this HP Pavilion system. Now, as we get started here, I do want to throw out there that there will be future testing of both the GPU independently of this system, the RX 5500, as well as the integrated graphics of this system. That would be with the Ryzen 5300G. So if you're interested in especially those APU graphics to see how a modern APU from AMD performs, make sure you're subscribed down below so you don't miss any of that content. And also, I will go ahead and link the Amazon listing to this particular build in the description down below as well. But I'll also go ahead and throw a Reddit link down there to the Build a PC Sale subreddit, because that is where you're going to find this PC on sale, because the normal listing price, at least on HP's website, is higher than what I paid for it. But often what you'll find is there will be a limited time discount code that will actually allow you to get a computer like this at a reasonable cost. So basically, the best way to get this at a good price is to keep an eye on that subreddit and then just make sure that you're ready to go with the money when it does go on sale, or when a similar system goes on sale. You can actually hop over to the website, put in the discount code, and get yourself a solid gaming computer in a market where it's almost impossible to get a solid gaming computer at a reasonable price. And that brings us right over to the pricing of, I believe I paid something like $588 after shipping and after taxes and everything else to get this PC delivered to my door. So at that price, the 5300G, 8 gigabytes of RAM, a 256 gigabyte SSD, as well as an RX 5500, that should actually be a decent price for a system like this. But of course, we can't make any conclusions about the system until I've had a chance to actually game test it. So with that in mind, and before we get onto the games, I do want to open up this system and take a look at how everything is laid out and kind of just get the lay of the land with this system. Though again, there's more content coming about this HP Pavilion where I'll go a little bit more in depth with the teardown, but let's go ahead and get this system opened up. So here we have the HP Pavilion on its side. I'll just go ahead and get rid of the side panel here, though it is worth noting where this ventilation on the side panel is. It's sort of towards the front here. Now, as you'll see here, first and foremost, I have this SATA SSD. This is my test bench SSD that I actually completely reformatted for the benchmarking of this particular PC. So this is really just a completely fresh install of Windows. Basically, I just needed more space than the 256 gigabyte M.2 that comes with this PC. And there's a look at that M.2 drive. Pretty basic, looks like it has like one memory module on it whatsoever. So it's pretty dense, but this is 256 gigabytes of SSD space, and the M.2 slot that drops into is right here above the GPU in this chassis, or rather on this motherboard. Now I'll go into a more thorough teardown of this system, kind of comment more on it, but the main components here are now exposed. Obviously, again, I have the SSD that everything is running off of, and I will say all the cables here are pre-run for you, so even though it doesn't come with any SATA drives, they do have everything wired up for you to just drop in a hard drive in the drive bay, which obviously there is removable. But what we have here are 2 DIMM slots here, and both of those DIMM slots are filled with 4 gigabyte sticks of DDR4 memory. And these are Samsung DIMMs, at least that's the branding on the sticker, and also worth noting they're rated for 3200 megahertz, and I will say out of the box they do run at 3200 megahertz, so good on HP for actually having not just RAM that is rated at high speed, but also actually running out of the box at that 3200 megahertz. I know that's not the craziest high speed, but for an APU, that's actually really good to see, and being that it's a 2x4 kit, even though you're only getting 8 gigabytes here, you are at least getting dual channel with this particular system out of the box. The downside, of course, being if you want to upgrade to 16 gigabytes, which I actually would recommend for a system like this, then you're stuck with replacing both of these modules with a completely different set of RAM sticks, whereas if it had just a 8 gigabyte stick, you could just add a second 8 gigabyte stick. So there is a little bit of a trade-off here, but if you're not really planning to upgrade the RAM, this is definitely the best configuration to go with. And this is the RX 5500. This is a non-XT card. This is an OEM card with really the only branding just being Radeon printed on the sort of plastic shroud a couple of times here. The cooler, as you'll see in the gameplay a little bit later, seems to be actually perfectly adequate for this card. It does have an 8-pin power plug on the back, and I will also mention, since this was from Gamers Nexus somewhat recently with OEM cards, it does appear, and I'll do a teardown of this card later on once I have all the actual testing done, but it does appear that there are thermal pads that actually contact the cooler and the memory modules on this card. So hopefully when I tear this card down in a later video, make sure you're subscribed for that. I'll get a better look at that, but it does appear that the memory modules are actually contacting the cooler, so everything should be on the up and up for this RX 5500. And as far as I can tell, the 5500 is literally the exact same GPU as the 5500 XT. Looking at AMD's website, literally all of these specs are virtually identical, and I'll kind of give you a little bit of a comparison as I scroll through the 5500 XT and the 5500. So this is a 4 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, I believe, and yeah, it's a solid little GPU to come with the system. The power supply with this system is 400 watts. It's gold efficiency rated, so it actually should be solid even for a little bit of a GPU upgrade could be fitted in there. The only downside to the power supply is it is proprietary. We have a 4-pin power connector there, which you wouldn't find on a standard ATX power supply. And under this heatsink, which actually is fairly beefy, and that's good to see, we do have the Ryzen 5300G, which we'll test independently a little bit later on. There is one fan in the system outside of the heatsink and outside of it in the power supply. This is an exhaust fan that's going to pull air in from this area of the chassis where there's that vent, as well as the power supply intaking from this area and exhaust it out the back of the chassis. So airflow should be okay. It's not spectacular, but the components in this system aren't overly high-end and hot components to begin with. Getting us started with the gaming benchmarks here, these are all at 1080p, but we have Fortnite on the low graphics preset, and this game gave me some issues, and that relates to the actual core clock of the GPU. And I actually tried this game both on my SSD before I completely reformatted Windows and started completely fresh, and then again after I did the complete refresh of Windows, and both times this game was giving me issues. So this may be a driver level thing, but the core clock was all over the place with the GPU. Basically it was running much slower than I thought it really should be, and I felt like that was reflected in the average frame rate only being 192, the 1% low at 115, and the 0.1% low there at 37. And I don't really have time right now to go in depth with investigating why this is. This may be a driver level thing, and if it is, there is a simple fix you can do to actually force the game clock to stay, or rather the core clock to stay higher. And you can go into the Radeon software and actually just force the GPU to stay at a much higher clock speed to get those frame rates up. But right now I'm not really sure what's going on with that Fortnite number. That being said, the experience was still just fine with this title. You could totally be competitive and actually win games, which I almost did with this particular game I played while benchmarking this game. So it's not like the experience was terrible, it's just that for whatever reason the core clock was lower than it really should have been. Moving on to Overwatch on the high preset, the average was 152, the 1% low there at 110, and 0.1% low at 89. And as usual with Overwatch, unless you're running with really potato quality hardware, not only is this game giving you high frame rates, but you're also getting a very smooth experience, so we're all good here. In Call of Duty Warzone, on mostly low settings, the average was 106, 1% low at 73, and 0.1% low there at 27. This experience was fine. It wasn't spectacular, but at the same time, it wasn't a terrible experience either. Though, since I don't really play this game a whole lot on my own time, yeah, I just kind of worked through this benchmarking run and moved on with my life. But if you are into Call of Duty Warzone, this title will play just fine on this PC. Now getting into some single player titles, we have GTA 5 on high settings at 1080p. We saw an average frame rate here of 91, a 1% low there at 62, and a 0.1% low of 53. And yep, this was a really nice experience on this PC. Everything ran very smoothly, and I was having a good time running around the city and just sort of blowing things up. The Witcher 3 on the high preset gave us an average of 73, a 1% low of 58, and a 0.1% low of 16. And that 0.1% low comes in when I usually start the benchmarking run just a few seconds after actually loading into the game. And even though the frame rate seems smooth, as soon as you start to move around a little bit, especially in the city, the frame rate does stutter a little bit as things load in. After moving around for a little bit though, everything does smooth out, and that's why that 1% low is so much higher than the 0.1% low. So with The Witcher 3, as you load into the game with this PC, you may see some stuttering, and it will smooth out after a minute or two of gameplay. So this is a perfectly playable title here. Cyberpunk 2077 was okay at times. The 1% low being only 22 and the 0.1% low being down there at 10 does indicate that this game was stuttering quite a bit, and that is confirmed with the actual gameplay. So after a while in the game, things did seem like they were smoothing out a little bit, but this is sort of on the borderline of what I would call a good experience versus a not great experience. Now, to be clear, you could totally play through this game on this PC and probably have a pretty good time if you're into the title itself, but just understand there's a lot of hardware out there that'll run this title much better than the configuration we're seeing from the HP, and I'm not 100% sure whether that's down to the RAM configuration only having 8 gigabytes of system RAM, or if we're really being more hamstrung by the 4 cores and 8 threads of the CPU. Regardless, you could totally get a better experience with better hardware, but you can still play this game with this PC. And finally, Hitman 3 gave us a really nice experience on low settings. The average in the Dubai level was 111, the 1% low there was 76, and the 0.1% low was 51. And being a slower paced title in general, this was a perfectly good, playable, and really just a nice experience in Hitman 3. So let's go ahead and talk about some conclusions with this system. At under $600, I actually really like the package that HP has here. Now, to be clear with that, there are some things I hate about this computer that I really wish HP would have cleaned up, because it wouldn't have taken a whole lot, and this system would be an easy recommendation for me, especially at this price with this current market. But because the power supply is proprietary, because the motherboard is actually attached to the front I/O, there are components that are tied together in this system. If you ever wanted to, for instance, recase this system, basically you're going to be getting a new case, a new power supply, and a new motherboard just to get the core components out of this system into something custom. So I really hate that part about the system, but because the price was so good when I got it compared to the rest of the market, it's actually sort of worth it to me, and it's not like it gives you no upgrade path whatsoever. It's just a pretty limited upgrade path because that power supply is gonna limit what you can do with a GPU and a CPU upgrade. But the Ryzen 5000 platform does have a lot of options on the CPU side of things to actually upgrade there, and there are plenty of GPUs out there that are low enough power that they would fit into a system like this, but then you might start running into some thermal issues because there is no front intake and there's just one exhaust fan if you don't count the power supply as an exhaust. So there are limitations to this system, but I keep coming back to that price point because it's the big thing with this system. If you get it at the right price, it's suddenly a really solid value because there are components in here that you can transfer to a new build down the road. If, of course, you're paying the retail price with no discount whatsoever, then this is an easy pass. And for that matter, if you find another pre-built that does use standard components that has roughly the same specs as this system, get the other one, because if you have standard components, they're easier to work on, they're easier to swap out. Everything is just easier with keeping that system up and running. But if you're just looking for a quick system that gets you up and running, it gives you good 1080p performance, the thermals are just fine in this system with this configuration, yeah, I could actually recommend that you buy it. But those are, of course, just my thoughts on this system as it sits right now. There is more testing to do with individual components and the system as a whole, so once again, make sure you're subscribed for that. But I do want to hear from you guys. What do you think about some of these pre-builts, especially the ones from Dell and HP? What's the price that you're willing to pay for a system outfitted like this one? And also, while you're there, if you like this video, give it a like, share, subscribe, comment. All those things are very helpful for the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.